This is the Ferrari 296 GTB and 458 Destroyers collection, and thanks to one very simple mod, I think this could be the very best sounding V6 street car in the world. Now, some of you may recognize this exact 296 GTB because it was featured on Miss Amelia Hartford's channel where she made this modification. If you haven't watched those videos yet, make sure you go check them out. She did some crazy things with the car. But we're not talking about that today. We're talking about what she did to make this car sound so incredibly good, making this custom exhaust. Now, when this car arrived in 458 Destroyers collection, it was one of, if not the very first 296s here in the United States. So there were no exhausts off the shelf already being made. So when Amelia offered to custom fabricate an exhaust for it, of course, he had to say yes. But it's not enough to make a car sound good by just fitting it with an exhaust. You have to have an incredible engine beneath it, which is exactly what Ferrari's engineers did with this 3-liter, 120-degree twin turbocharged V6. And if you're skeptical about a mid-engine Ferrari having a V6, keep in mind that in conjunction with the plug-in hybrid drive system, this car makes over 800 horsepower and will do 0 to 60 well under 3 seconds and do over 200 miles an hour. Let's just walk around, show you a bit of the car, and let's talk about how this car compares to the incredible SF90 we talked about in the last video. There is a lot of design philosophy that's shared between these two cars. They're similar in a lot of ways, and they're also extremely different in a lot of ways. Here in 458 Destroyers collection, I believe this car is actually finished in the same black that the SF90 is finished in. However, this car has just normal gloss paint protection film, whereas the SF90 has that really cool looking satin wrap. Taking a closer look at the front bumper, we have this mesh grille that goes all the way across the front. We've got our carbon fiber splitters here on the side, and these really cool integrated inlets right next to the headlights. And moving to the center, we have a little tiny nose camera up here so you don't scrape the nose. This car does have nose lift, which is incredibly helpful on low cars like this. And as we will see in a minute, this car has an actual usable trunk. Moving down the side, we can see that the 296 does not have carbon fiber wheels. We do have the carbon brakes behind them, but these not being carbon makes it a lot less stressful to drive. Now, the design language of the 296 overall is pretty subtle. There's not a whole lot going on here down the side. We do have a big carbon fiber splitter that runs from front to back, and we do have, not quite as big as the SF90, but we do have the inlets on each shoulder. And then my favorite design element of the entire car is this really cool vintage-inspired rear section where the roof line meets into the rest of the car in this transparent engine cover. And just like the nose of the car, we have this mesh grille that runs all along the back and a big carbon fiber diffuser. Overall, it is a lot more subtle when you get up close than the SF90, but I think all of it adds up to be a really, really, really pretty car. Before we move on to the interior, let's take a look at that trunk space I was talking about real quick, just to show you that this car can be used as a comfortable daily driver or road trip car, depending on how far you're planning on going. Look at that. This has to be like 5 times the space that the SF90 has. Moving on to the interior, I'm not going to spend a ton of time here because basically it's really, really similar to the SF90 that we saw in the last video. Really simplistic, which is really good in a car that all you want to do is drive. We've got the full carbon seats, which are a lot more comfortable than they look. 296, and then inside, of course, we have the same kind of touch haptic buttons that we saw in the SF90. It's not my favorite. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And then other than that, there's really not a whole lot going on in this interior. Something that is a cool little touch here is that this is where the key goes. So like in the SF90, in this little center slot here, if you don't want to leave the key in your pocket, which this is actually a really cool key, you can just slide it right in this slot right there. But of course, you're probably not that interested in the interior of the 296. What we're interested in is how this car sounds. So let's take a look at the engine and then hear how it sounds. And like the SF90, the first thing you notice is how tightly packaged and low down this engine sits. I don't know if you can see this, but that 120-degree V, how wide apart the cylinder banks are and how low this engine sits is incredible how they package all this stuff together. I think that's enough talking about the 296, so let's fire it up, hear how it sounds, and get it out on the road. Welcome to the Ferrari 296 GTB and 458 Destroyers collection. Now, right off the bat, this car has a ton of similar driving characteristics to the SF90 we saw in the previous video. And of course, that would make sense because the philosophy of the driveline is the same. They're both twin turbocharged engines that are also assisted by a hybrid system. So this car has ballistic pickup just like the SF90 from any speed, anywhere. Now, of course, that car is, people call it its bigger brother, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this car is any slouch in any way. Despite making almost 150 or 160 horsepower less than the SF90, this car still makes 820 horsepower, and this car feels ridiculous on these tight, twisty back roads like we're driving on right now. However, unlike the SF90, this is right at that threshold where it feels like it's a lot, but it doesn't feel like I can't use every bit of it. The SF90 is quick enough to where if you don't have a big enough straight, it's really hard to use all that power. This still feels like you could relatively use most of it. And man, I have to say, this exhaust sounds so good. There definitely is a weight difference between this and the SF90, and you can feel it on roads like this. And this car is just, man, on the SF90 video, the only thing I kept coming back to talk about was just how quick it was. And this car definitely is quick, and I could go on and on and on about how quick this car is. But the thing I want to go on and on and on about is how much fun this car is. And I know a lot of it has to do with that exhaust, because I'll admit I haven't driven a stock standard 296 before, but this sounds so good. If I owned a 296, this is exactly what I would do to it day one, because even running right now at like 4,000 RPM, the tone of the exhaust, the pitch, is much higher than you would think that you're actually doing. So I'm only doing 4,000 RPM right now, but it sounds a lot higher than that, and that makes it more enjoyable, more fun to drive. And it sounds so good. Now, I'm not driving really anywhere near the limit of this car on these tiny back roads, but the tone of this car combined with how quick it is from any RPM makes it so much fun on the back roads to feel like you're really pushing the limit. A lot of the headlines I've seen in Ferrari marketing is like, this is the most fun car, bringing fun back to driving. I gotta say, this is a lot of fun, and it's just, there's very small differences between this and the SF90, and this feels more fun to me. It feels more accessible, it feels lighter, it feels nimbler. I just really love it. And coupled with that exhaust, it just makes it all the better, and you just want to keep driving. And the craziest thing about this, and again, it's one of the reasons that Ferrari went to such great lengths to make this car sound good, because a lot of the times when you think of Ferrari, most of the time I think people think of V12s, or you think of also all the iconic V8s that Ferrari makes. You don't think of Ferrari with a V6. But this car, they've done such a good job. This charging flap sensor must be going bad, because it keeps thinking the charging flap is open, and it's definitely not. But the V6 in this car, Ferrari did such a good job nailing the sound. And again, with this exhaust, it just amplifies it up to 11. So one thing we're gonna try out real quick, because we have to do it, is launch control. See how this car launches, because the SF90 launched like a freaking rocket ship. So let's see how the 296 does from a launch. Come to a stop, hold the brake, engage launch control, here we go. A little bit of wheel spin. God. You can really start to feel it pick up once it starts getting traction and a little bit of movement. That's not quite as neck snapping off the line. You could hear it struggling for grip a little bit. But this car is no slouch. I gotta say, on back roads like this, I would take this car over the SF90. Now, the 296 GTS is not in the garage yet, but when that comes in, I think that's gonna make it even better. To have this kind of a soundtrack with the roof off, that's gonna be back road heaven. I love it. I just love it. Now, I know I've been rambling on about this car and just how much fun it is, but the big takeaway is that this car is amazing, fun to drive, and this is very much one of the go-tos that I try to grab the keys for if we ever have a big convoy group of people. 458 Destroyers being kind enough to let us drive some of his cars. This one is one of the first ones that I will go for. Just like the 812, this car is such a joy to drive, and all it makes you want to do is keep driving. So that's what I'm gonna do. I hope I catch you guys in the next video. If you're new to the channel, what's up? My name is Charlie. I help make content for the channel. I really appreciate you for sticking around. Check out the channel for more cars. We're constantly putting out content. I'll see you guys in the next one.